Okay. Well, I'm making this tape because I just came across yet another so-called expose, the truth, about Jeane Palfrey, the D.C. madam, which, again, I find very interesting that people who put these shows together are very aware of who I am and that I exist and how to reach me, but yet no one ever contacts me to talk to me about her, what happened to her, the story behind her death, etc., and sort of, my take on the situation, which you'd think, being that I was considered her best friend at the time, someone that she spoke to daily, that I have daily emails and texts from the woman from the day we struck up a friendship to the day of her death, including conversations I had with her mother and the police around her death. I would think that my story would be interesting, which goes to me is if her story was a suicide, why are all these people going to all this trouble to make it seem like I don't exist? And all the other things that happened connected to her after her death, which is why I'm making this recording, because I think a lot of people don't want what I have to say, my take on the situation, heard, obviously. So I'm going to start with that. Who I am, how this happened, etc. My name is Jody Williams. I'm a person that created a hotline back in '87, which was originally called the Prostitutes Anonymous Hotline. It was the first hotline by those who had been in some form of the sex industry at some point, designed to be a hotline where you could call and get help, whatever the situation was, whether it was you were just getting older and wanted some help transitioning out of the business, or whether you had a pimp that you were trying to escape, or if you were in a trafficking situation and needed help, whatever the situation was, because we had learned, those of us who'd been in the industry ourselves had learned that the police were not necessarily not effective, but not generally aware and didn't know how to handle a lot of the situations that would come up, which is why it was best sort of to have things handled internally by us, because we had a better grasp on the situation, so to speak. And when I say that we're in the business, for those of you who aren't aware who I am or the group, I had been arrested in '84 myself and dubbed the high-tech madam, which is why I relate very much to what Jeannie went through. I call her Jeannie. Some people call her Deborah, whichever name you want to call her, but I call her Jeannie. And so, because in 1984, I'd been arrested along with my mother over supposedly running a brothel in Van Nuys, California in 1984. It was a cover story. If you look up on Google, you will find out that every top-level madam in the country on both the East and West Coast were arrested in 1984, were plastered all over the media. And now looking back, now that we are aware of Iran-Contra, you have a better idea what was really going on behind the scenes on that story. Now, I am grateful to people like Chuck Barris, who's come forward as much as he can, relatively, with telling his story about his connection with the CIA back then while he was producing The Dating Game. And he does allude to the sex trafficking that was going on in connection to that show with his film, which, of course, could be true, not true, however you want to look at it. But I have my own stories about that time and know that there was a lot going on in connection with that show and Hollywood and the CIA, et cetera, at that time. And I believe that's why we all were basically set up for these arrests in '84, was for the government to get control of us. It's very well known now that she's dead. It's out in the media, not a big secret, that Alex Adams, the Beverly Hills madam, was a known informant for the government until the day she died. But she also was an informant a long time. She had a lot to do with my arrest. She had a lot to do with Heidi Fleiss' arrest, et cetera. So my point being that I'd gone through my own high-profile arrest, and I had my own sick mother I was taking care of, as Jeannie was also taking care of her elderly sick mother also. We'd both, run things as a business. We both had seen very similar things. So when I saw the news about her arrest, I immediately knew what kind of emotional devastation, financial devastation. I mean, I also knew the danger this woman was going to be in, which is why I reached out to her immediately. Got a hold of, the news had given me the name of her attorney at the time, who is Montgomery Sibley, and got a hold of him, introduced myself. I said, I've been through a high-profile trial like this, so I can help navigate the situation a little bit for you guys, give you kind of a heads up about what's going on, and I really wanted to reach out and provide some emotional support to her during this time to help her navigate the process, because I already knew, because of what my own shared experience was, knowing what these other madams have gone through, I already knew that she was not going to be able to get her voice heard about what was really going on, and that was going to be a very difficult thing for her to deal with emotionally at that time. So, and I also wanted to warn her about some of the dangers that she was going to be facing, like ABC. So, I reached out to her basically as an effort to extend an offer of friendship and guidance. And also she'd have to be leaving the business, so of course it was outreach. We changed our name to Sex Workers Anonymous in 95 because of the Internet. The Internet would block the word prostitute in 95, so we changed the name to Sex Workers Anonymous because it would bypass all the adult filters on the Internet. So that's the only reason. It wasn't a big political statement. It was just to bypass the adult blocks on the Internet. Anyway, so I reached out to her knowing that, she was going to have a long process to deal with, as I did, going through that whole situation myself. So from the day, basically I heard the news of her arrest was around October 2006, if I remember correctly. And her and I clicked. We always do. One thing about madams, when you understand the madam personality, we just click, because we tend to definitely appear to be loners to the outside world, when the truth is we just don't get along with everybody. We just don't, there's not that common ground, that common understanding. Especially a lot of women in the business, that are working, we tend to, it just doesn't click. But we do click very well with each other, which is why I've been friends with many madams for over, 40 years now. Some of them till they died. I was friends with Alex till she died. I mean, so, or even just making a touch-base phone call every couple of years. How you doing, that kind of thing. Anyway, but Jeannie and I really clicked because she was going through the trial, and I was really trying to provide some guidance as I could from having walked that road. There's not a lot of people that have walked that road before, especially with a sick, disabled mother like she had, like I had also. So, and we did click. Like I said, I think we talked every day until the day of her death. So I don't think there was anybody else closer to her than maybe her mother. And myself. I'm getting, I have gotten quite angry about Montgomery's position in the media lately, because when he was disbarred during her trial, there was no contact with him that I'm aware of, really. Basically, he went to go take care of saving his own ass after he got disbarred, because Jeannie was basically fed to the lions. I mean, she was surrounded by danger. There was a very immense danger with this woman, and she was very aware of it. And that had a lot to do with her attempts to leave the country. I mean, if you look back at her prior arrest in 91, she was trying to go to Canada. That's when she was trying to get out of the country. Now, one thing that's not brought out in the news when they talk about her arrest is that she was at the airport. She was getting ready to go to Germany, because what had happened, she was actually trying to retire. She was trying to leave the business, leave the country, because she knew that her days were numbered. One of the reasons that she had collected the phone log was she pretty much knew that the things that she was involved in, while a madam, which I'm very aware of because I also was involved and I witnessed what was going on with Iran-Contra back in L.A. in the 80s, which you only get half the story. When I see stories like Snowfall, Rick Freeway Ross's story, yeah, they're telling the story of Iran-Contra from the drug dealer male point of view. They're not telling you the rest of the story. the story involving sex trafficking. And one of the reasons why you don't ties into Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, this thing with the island and Epstein and these men, this has been going on since the 70s. And one of the reasons why they've been trying to keep a real tight lid on how much of the story of Iran-Contra's gotten out is because they don't want the sex trafficking part of the story, the connection to the adult industry, the connection with prostitution, the escort services, et cetera. They don't want the whole story, the whole rest of the story getting out. So that's one reason why it's been very difficult for people like myself and also Jeannie to get her story out about the truth, which kind of, I think, goes into why I think she was murdered. But so she had been looking for property in Germany. She told me she had realized, these are all stories she told me, maybe true or not, whatever, but it's what she told me. She told me that, and I understood that she could see her days were numbered. A lot of the high-level intrigue that she was involved in, the fact that she was getting, every couple of months, getting a visit from somebody within the CIA and the FBI who would do what she called debriefing. They'd want to know about her clients, about their picadillos, about their fetishes. They wanted to know all the details about the clients, and she was doing missions. She had certain women that were being sent out on certain connections with instructions to maybe swing certain projects, influence certain things, speed certain information. I mean, it was way beyond the escort level of things and getting very much into political sort of intrigue, espionage, whatever we want to call it, which had happened to me right before my arrest also. So I know exactly where she was coming from. Things had gotten really sticky. I also had many attempts on my life after my arrest, and that's actually one reason why I started going on television back in 87. My first television appearance was because I kept getting shot at. I kept having attempts on my life, and it was very obvious that there were people that wanted me kept quiet. My attorney had confirmed that he was very aware that there was attempts on my life. He told me that he had heard about an attempt that was going to be made on my life while I was in custody, while I was in jail, and warned me how to get out of there in one piece. So I was very aware that people wanted me dead, quiet, not, I just would have been another dead hooker of an overdose, right? Or another dead hung hooker. No, nobody asked questions about that kind of thing. I mean, look at Sylvia Landry hung in her jail cell, or Brandy Britton hung in her living room. Nobody really pursues that when you come from our background with our label. So it was very clear to me somebody was trying to kill me, and that's when, again, my attorney had said, well, make yourself a public figure. Get yourself out there so that if anything happens to you, there's questions. So that's one reason why I started doing as much television, actually, back there in 87, and to promote the hotline, get the news out of the hotline. So it served two purposes. But that's the only reason I started going on television, was the attempts that were getting on my life were getting really scary. So you got to realize this is before Gary Webb had really validated what was going on with Iran-Contra. So there were people that were still trying to keep a lid on the whole story. So I get, that Jeannie was very concerned that at some point something was going to happen to her to keep her quiet. That's why she'd been trying to leave the country. I mean, you think about it. If somebody's just going to retire, they're just going to retire. Why would they go to all the trouble to leave the country? And also realize her mother was disabled. Her mother was sick. Her mother was needing care. So why would she really go to that extreme of leaving her mother like that unless she was in fear of her life? And both times they caught her at the border of Canada, arrested her. It's an excuse. It's an excuse to stop her from leaving the country and keep control of her. The same thing with Germany. She had gotten the money together, found some property in Germany. She was ready to retire and get the hell out of Dodge, because especially after Brandy Britton's so-called suicide, she told me she knew that Brandy was also not a suicide. Again, the personality type. You don't generally see that type of personality commit suicide, especially the timing. Brandy Britton was getting ready to testify at her trial. So it was very clear that certain people didn't want her on that trial, because when you're on the trial, you can't refuse to answer certain questions. So, especially considering that Brandy Britton's irregular was supposedly David Vitter, and the same thing with Sylvia Landry. Sylvia Landry also had David Vitter as irregular, and anytime it got to the point where these women could be questioned, boom, suddenly they're magically hanging from the rafters. So, she could see the handwriting on the wall. After Brandy Britton was found dead in her living room, hung supposedly, which she didn't believe either was suicide, she felt it was just a matter of time before something happened to her, and she wanted to get out of the country, retire, and be safe. So that's why she'd been looking at property in Germany, and they stopped her at the airport. I mean, why would they arrest her then unless it was that she was leaving the country? It wasn't like they put the case together and arrested her. It was an excuse. It was an excuse to stop her from leaving the country. She'd also told me many times that they'd offered her, a deal. That essentially the deal was they wanted her to continue doing what she was doing. They didn't want to put her in jail. She pushed for that, which is another misconception that people really need to understand about her. She pushed for that trial. She was trying to get it out on public record, her story, the names in that file, the names in her black book, the story behind everything. She was trying to get the story out of what was going on public record. The judge kept, blocking her every step of the way. The press was blocking her every step of the way. She really didn't know any other way than to keep pushing that trial to get more information on the record. When Montgomery got disbarred, all we remember was he was gone. He was no longer in the picture, because I remember her scrambling. It was like a free fall after he was gone of who's going to represent this woman. Nobody wants to take on a case like this. Her money's all been frozen in sea, so it's not like she's got cash to turn over to some attorney. And who wants this media circus on top of it? I mean, there was a real scramble. She wasn't even getting, if he'd continued to provide her with advice or emotional support, that's one thing, but he didn't, not to my knowledge. I certainly never got a call from him saying, how are things going? And she never told me about any calls, even of moral support from the man after, he was off the case. So, she was left to her own devices at that point. What happened was, and this is it, when she saw that the court was not going to really let her get her story out, let her get the records out, let her get the names out, when she saw she was getting blocked in the press, blocked on the case, this is when I remember she had opened up talks with Larry Flint. At that time, he had some contest, and we'd all heard about it for years. We had some contest. If anybody had proof of high-level connections with prostitution in the government, that he would give $1 million reward. She believed she was going to get that reward, and I say that because we'd made plans. We started making plans about, well, if we can't get your story out in the press, if we can't get your story out in the record, that kind of thing, then maybe we can make our own movie, write our own book, etc. Now, what had happened was, of course, everybody is reluctant to want to produce their own film, whatever. She didn't really know if a lot of what I said was true, but I started explaining to her about my own problems that I'd seen with the media over the movies. Of course, they all did the same thing to me. They all rushed to me after the arrest. And as they did all the madams, they rushed all of them. And every one of them, I've talked to them saying, did this movie have any relation to reality? Because it certainly didn't look like what I remember. And they all laughed and said, no, it had no relation to reality, but what the hell? They got a check and it was good entertainment. But it was not the truth. It was not the whole story. Jeannie was interested in getting the story out because in her belief, and I understand this belief, that the truth was going to be the only way that she didn't have to worry about being murdered. That's why she was trying to leave the country. She was afraid of being murdered for what she knew. And the same thing, she felt like the only way to not be murdered was to get out everything she knew before that could happen. I remember when ABC had first started contacting her about wanting to go over her book. Funny thing is, I'd had some bad experiences with ABC. I also know that there's a story about Johnny Ghosh, a boy that had been kidnapped and trafficked in connection with the Franklin, Omaha murders and trafficking. And records disappeared. Whole boxes of records disappear. And I've had the same thing happen with ABC also. I've had, records disappear, and I've had them say one thing, and then the story comes out a complete other. So when they had said that they wanted to take a real look at the phone logs and get the story out about the true names in the book, I cautioned her. I said, don't give them the originals, and you're going to have to make sure you get backups to other media sources, because there's a really strong potential that they're going to lie and try to, cover up this agenda. And I still remember watching the first show where the guy comes out and says, no, there's no names of any significance we found in the book. Well, thank God that we'd given a copy to the Smoking Gun, who then said, not so fast, and, pointed out a couple names that were in there, which actually made ABC back up and said, oh, okay, well, maybe we didn't look so good. And they took another look and started coming up with some names. But the names that had come out that she released was not all of them. And see, that's sort of her story. Her problem is that she had told me she was keeping a lot of the names back in case she was found guilty in her case, because she was really feeling like, why should she be branded a felon? Why should she be branded a criminal when she'd been doing the bidding of the government? I mean, this is her position, her thought process at the time, is the government was asking me to basically be like a spy for them. We've seen movies like, the pitcher was a spy or something like that, or about the baseball player that was a spy. She felt like, I'm doing what the government wanted me to do. I'm doing what they've asked me to do. I'm serving my country. So why should I be labeled a criminal over doing what the government has been asking me to do? And that's what she was pushing for on the case. So she said, if they insist and they make me guilty and try to paint me out to be a criminal, then I will blow the whole thing out there about what really happened. And we had been planning on, like I said, the money coming from Larry Flint. We were putting together a production company called Madam Productions, because we felt like if we got that money to start the production company, that's kind of what the plan was, is not only were we going to tell her story in a documentary, but we were going to sit down all the madams and tell the story. I was going to do it. Alex was still alive at the time, the Beverly Hills Madam. I'd been in contact with the Mayflower Madam. Heidi Fleiss is still alive. I'm sure we could have probably approached her about telling, the untold stories that haven't come out yet. And that's kind of the plan. We had a whole, like I said, there was a lot of plans about this production company. When the author came at her and started, I think his name was Moldia, when he'd come at her really pursuing the idea about the book, she wanted to see what a name author could do, but at the same time, she knew that she was going to have to publish her own. So, yes, she was working with him, but she was also working on her own ideas, which now, looking back, I think I have a better idea why this author was getting close to her, because he's the one that came out, started saying this stuff about her being suicidal, claiming whole conversations with her that it just didn't sound to me like her. It didn't sound like her character. I don't know where he got these conversations from. Of course, there's no proof. It's just his word. But, I've learned a lot about how these people operate. They get someone close to you, and then they're the ones that talk to the media about your supposed story. I've had the same thing. I've had people talk about me, entirely fabricated stories. So, I'm not saying he's lying. I'm just saying it didn't make any sense to me. Didn't fit her character, not any understanding of what I knew. He didn't talk about any of the things that she'd talked to me about, so I don't know what was up there. I don't know if she told him, didn't tell him. I don't know. I just get a different story out of that author, which I found interesting, because she didn't go looking for him. He came looking for her and attached himself to her as a project. And now I tend to wonder, because I look out now and the media talks to him of this version of suicide, but they sure as hell ain't talking to me. And I'm the one that talked to her, like I said, every day until her death. And that was the plan. I remember we were getting ready to do a whole production company. We were going to get all the Madam stories down in a documentary with that money to get that going, and the books. We were going to get our books written our way, our words, the stories that weren't coming out in the media. So she had plans. But she also, again, she felt very responsible for her sick mother, as I did when my mother had died in January of 2006. So my mother had just died, and I got it. I mean, my mother just died in January of 2006. So, and I'm meeting her around October of 2006. So I'm getting the responsibility that you're feeling towards your elderly sick mother. There was no way she was going to do anything to leave the mother. Now, I have found it interesting that these so-called suicide notes where they say she left plans for when she was, supposedly in the event. No, what that was we knew that she was at risk of being murdered. There was not a doubt. She was aware of this when she went to Germany and got arrested to begin with, that people were going to want to murder her. So she was very aware she was on borrowed time and anything could happen. She was very aware she could be murdered. She did leave instructions. I remember working with her on those instructions. I'm a paralegal, so I had worked with her on her will, her instructions about what to do in the event of her death, what to do with her assets, what the rights to the different things. I mean, we had all these things in order in the event she was murdered. This wasn't, I'm going to kill myself, this is what I want you to do. No, those things that she wrote out, I remember writing that stuff out with her. We wrote it out in the event anything happened to her to be prepared because of the responsibility she felt towards her mother. Now, and I know the government was not too happy with me after our relationship because I remember warning her that after her arrest that they were going to come after her mother. And I, had talked to her attorney at the time, the new one that she got after Sibley, warning him, they're going to come after the mother. You watch, because that's a common tactic. It's what they did to Heidi. It's what they do. They don't have a good case against you, so they go after your family member, jack them up so that you make a plea deal. So, I'd warn them about that, and I still remember that I'm literally talking to the mother, Jeannie, and the lawyer about the fact that, be prepared. They're going to come after the mother, try to, arrest the mother on something to make Jeannie take a plea when, boom, 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 there's a knock on the door. It was the Inspector General coming to the house, and they had plans to arrest the mother, Jeannie's mother. But the lawyer was prepared, basically talked to them. Again, what they're relaying to me, what they're telling me is that they had told the Inspector General and these arresting officers, et cetera, that to arrest the mother at that time would be sort of like kicking a sick puppy, that it would not be very good PR. And because it is becoming old hat, because, we are seeing it's a very common tactic that they use. So they evidently left. They did not charge the mother. So that was like, we felt like we escaped a bullet. However, it got me on the shit list of the government because they felt like I had warned her and had her prepared. But I was just trying to be prepared. This is a woman fighting for her life. And in my opinion, it wasn't about the case. It was about fighting for her life. And I knew that part of the situation about getting the mother and getting the plea is to try to continue to make the silence so that you don't talk about what's really going on behind this case. And so I do remember she had told me if they really go through with this and they really label me a criminal and they really try to make me go to prison and paint that whole picture on me for what they've asked me to do, what they've put me in this position to do, etc., she says, I will release the rest of the names. So she was always talking about the rest of the names that were even bigger than the names that have come out so far. She had backup lists for these names, and the reason why I bring it up is because the day, I know a lot of people that are, wondering about her death have questions about that day. I remember that the day before, she had called me saying, this is it, they're getting ready, something's about to pop off. I'm like, why? And she told me that somebody had been following her all day. She couldn't shake the tail. She said they were on her. They were on her hard. And I said, well, do you think it's just the press, you know? And she said, no, it's not the press. She said she got a really dark vibe off of whoever was following her. There was very hostile vibe, not the press. She said there was something different and dark about it. I suggested that she run to Canada. I said, just screw it. Just get in your car, drive to Canada. Forget it. Just go underground and lay low. I mean, I had to go through a lot of that myself on my trial. I went and I know I stayed with my grandmother. I changed my hair color. I got color contacts. I gained weight. You know, I made myself look different. I stayed in a house for almost a year. I wouldn't come out of my grandmother's house because every time I came out of the house, somebody would take a shot at me or something. So, and I remembered, see, that's the thing. I remembered that when I was staying and hiding out with my grandmother, these men would keep trying to get me to leave the house. And my lawyer had advised me, he said, they're going to try to get you to leave the house because they can't murder you. They can't make it look like suicide while you're with your grandmother. So he said, don't leave the house. He said, because they'll have to get you out of the house because, again, your grandmother's your witness. You're obviously not going to kill yourself with her right there, so they're going to have to try to get you out of the house. So I remember it stuck with me that he warned me, don't leave the house. And then there were these weird excuses. I mean, guys would come by with all kinds of excuses. Will you help me look for my dog? There was one claim where he claimed my car was double parked and being towed. I didn't have a car out front. I mean, any excuse they could think of to try to get me to leave the house, I wouldn't leave the house. So, and it stuck with me about those attempts to get me out of the house that year that I was at risk of being murdered. So when she was telling me she was being followed and I'm telling her just run to Canada, her immediate thought was my mother. She said, I can't leave my mother. She said, if they're coming after me, I'm really worried that they might try to do something to my mother. She had gone to her mother's house to protect her mother. She had felt like if she stayed with her mother through the night, watched over her mother, protected her mother, that was the whole purpose of going to the house that night, what she told me. And so I remember she'd gone home to get the phone books, and she had told me the phone logs. She said, I'm going to have to hold a press conference, and I'm going to have to release these names. She said, the only way to get this off my ass. I mean, the guy following her had spooked that they were getting ready to murder her. And she felt like a press conference would be the only way to back everybody up. So she told me she had gone home to get a box of the phone logs, and then to her mother's to protect her mother. Now, when she had gone to her mom's, of course, I had her call me when she got to her mom's house. I said, call and let me know you're there. She called me when she was there, and I had warned her. I said, you have got to promise me you will not leave the house, no matter what excuse they try. Come to the door to try to get you to leave the house, not to leave the house. And she promised me she wouldn't leave the house. She wouldn't leave her mother, because I remember her saying that to me. She said, I'm not going to let them take me away from my mom and watch over her. So, and I talked to the mom. The mom said she was tired. She was going to bed, and everything was fine. And Jeannie said that as long as her mom was in bed, she said she'd probably just go to sleep and everything would be fine. And it was just, I mean, she was fired up. She was gearing up for the press conference to reveal more names. She was gearing up to make this production company and work on these films that we were working on. She had plans. We were geared up. I mean, again, these so-called suicide notes that she had were in the event of her death. If anything happens to me, do this. It was all just precautionary. The thing that I find interesting is, of course, hey, you never know anybody. I could be wrong. Maybe it was suicide. I don't know. Maybe she lied to me. Who knows? But I found the events that happened to me after her death telling. Because, of course, I believe she was murdered. I mean, especially when I heard, because I remember thinking I told her not to leave the house. She promised me she wasn't going to leave the house. And I'm hearing that she's found in the outside shed, of course, hung, which it just really did not fit. Why would she? She prided herself on not being like Brandy Britton. She wouldn't want to go out like Brandy Britton. I mean, just none of it made sense to me as far as suicide went. So the first thing I did when I heard the news was I called down to Florida, and I asked to speak to the officer in charge of investigating her death. I don't remember who I talked to because obviously I was pretty emotional, as you can imagine, at the time. I just demanded to speak to the guy in charge of the investigation. Got a hold of a detective. He said he was the one in charge. And I introduced myself. I said, I'm her best friend. I've talked to her every day for the last year. I've got emails. I told him, I said, I've got emails back and forth every day. I've got text messages back and forth. You may find them relevant as far as what happened in her death. I said, I'm willing to turn them over to you. And I said, I also do not believe it was suicide. And I demanded, I said, I demand that you do a full investigation. I said I wanted a toxicology report done to see if she was drugged. I told him I wanted fingerprints done on the rope, supposedly that hung her. I said, I believe she was murdered, and I want you to do a full investigation. So, of course, he supposedly took down my information, noted it, never heard from him again. I mean, that's the question I've always wondered. If there was a proper, full investigation done, why didn't anybody contact me, interview me? Why didn't anybody ask to see those emails, those text messages? I would think a full investigation would want to look at that stuff. No. But I will say this. About 3 days later, I had done 4 Geraldo shows in the 80s, when his wife produced the show. So I remember being, close with CC. And I had talked to his brother when his brother had started producing his show on Fox. And I remember, that there was a little talk off and on during Jeannie's trial about bringing Jeannie and me on the show. So I'd already opened up dialogue with Geraldo's brother. So, I had his number. And after her death, which I felt was murder, and I felt I knew why, etc. So I remember contacting his brother saying I, would like to come on the show and talk about why I think she was murdered. He had booked something where I was supposed to fly out. I remember I was supposed to fly out a few days later. So that was the plan I had. I was supposedly going to get on a plane from Las Vegas, where I was actually in Tonopah at the time, Tonopah, Nevada, and fly out and do a show about why I felt it was murder. He was the only producer at that time that even seemed the least bit interested in talking to me. Anyway, right before, about 3 days before the trip, I come back from a doctor's visit that I'd done, because I had to go down to Vegas to see doctors. My daughter's disabled. I'm disabled. We had to go see a doctor in Vegas. We come back from this trip, and there are 5 police officers in front of my apartment, and they have a search warrant. It's 5 a.m. They're waiting for me, and the search warrant was for me impersonating myself. Supposedly, the night that I'd heard about her death, I was pretty distraught, as you might imagine. So I ordered dinner delivered from a local restaurant. Called up. Now, when you do a phone order, you give them a credit card number over the phone. Bring out the food. Well, evidently, this is what the owner of the restaurant told me later, is that a police officer had contacted him saying, did the order go through? Did it pay? Yes, it paid. So they couldn't claim it was fraud or anything, evidently. So then he said, the officer asked if he'd actually seen the physical card and my identification, which of course he hadn't. It was a phone order. So he said no. They got a warrant based on the idea that I supposedly was impersonating myself. What they were looking for, I don't know. The search warrant didn't say what they were looking for, but I do know this. They came in and they tossed my house for 5 hours. They ripped my house to shreds. I mean, literally, I had the mattress drug out into the parking lot. Couch cushions torn open, wall sockets torn open. I mean, they ripped apart my house, just annihilated it. And again, what they're looking for, I don't know. But they took my identification. They took my checkbook. They took my debit cards. They took all forms of ID that I had in any form of getting money out of my bank account. I mean, no, they didn't take the cash, but they took my checkbook, my debit cards, everything, and my Social Security card, everything. which a search warrant did not ask for. But I can't argue with them. They're taking it. So how am I supposed to argue with them? Then after they tore apart my house, then one cop says, oh, my, this house is a mess. My daughter was a juvenile at the time. And they said, we can't let a child live in an environment like this. We have to call CPS and have her put into a safe, clean house. Now, I'm lucky that the lady at CPS laughed when heard the reason and evidently demanded that they give me 2 hours to straighten up the apartment. So I just sit there, despite the fact that I just driven in an 8-hour trip, and I'm disabled, and my daughter's been up all night. But, hey, I had 2 hours to put the apartment back together. So supposedly, and I took pictures to show that because I was obviously having to deal with officers who might be lying. So I took pictures to show that I'd put the apartment back into a habitable, condition. So they weren't happy about leaving at that point. They were back, and there was more harassments after that. But my point being is that without my identification and any money, I wasn't able to travel. And I couldn't even get my identification without a birth certificate, which to get my birth certificate, I had to order one out of California. So I wasn't going to be able to get any ID anytime soon. I had to contact Geraldo's brother and say, I can't travel. They had asked, in Tonopah, I remember they had talked about putting me on satellite, and in Tonopah, Nevada, there's no other studios. There's no other news stations with a satellite. So there was no way to put me on any other type of picture, where they could talk to me, interview me from Tonopah. And I had no car, so they literally were stuck. There was no way other than a phone interview. Which I guess they didn't think was sufficient to do a phone interview. But my point being is I obviously wasn't able to travel to do the interview. I wasn't able to get my money. I wasn't able to even access my money for 2 months because I had to order my birth certificate in order to get a copy of an ID. Now, I had contacted the police station the next day demanding my identification and debit cards back, because once they were safely gone, I felt safe enough that I said it was not in the search warrant. You had no right to seize this material, and I need my ID and my debit cards back so I can pay my rent, so I can, pay my bills, etc. And I got told, we never took your stuff. So there was denial about that. They were completely denying having possession of any of my things. And that's when I talked to one of the ladies at the court, and I said, do you know anything about what happened? And she had told me that she had heard a phone call come in from Florida. Some detective in Florida had called down at the Tonopah police station, and supposedly this is what started the whole process of some officer finding the restaurant where I'd ordered the dinner and the whole process of getting a search warrant. So, again, if they wanted information from me for part of an investigation, I was more than willing to give it. So I don't think that that's what the excuse was. I think it was obviously to block me from traveling and further harassment because of the whole campaign that went on afterwards, because one of these officers came back. My landlord started telling me that he was claiming I had torn up the apartment and then I should be evicted. I remember he came down and he checked it out. He goes, you haven't torn up your apartment? I go, no, I haven't torn up the apartment. He said the officer claimed I had torn up the apartment. So he goes, why is the guy lying on it? I don't know. This went on. He tells me the cop came back and started putting more pressure on him to have me removed, evicted. Finally, after a couple of weeks of this, he sits me down and he goes, I don't know what this guy's problem is. I don't know why he wants me to evict you so badly. He said, but I'm getting really concerned about your safety with this man obviously having an issue with you. So that's a weird feeling. Have your landlord tell you that he thinks for your own safety you need to move because he said obviously this cop had some problem, which he did. I think I moved. I took the landlord's advice. We moved 20 minutes after I moved, so obviously I'd been watched. Knock on the door. It's that officer. He asked if he could come into the room because I was staying in a hotel room until I could figure out where I was going to move. And I didn't want him off the security cameras. So I said, if you don't have a search warrant, no, you can't come in my room. That pissed him off. Oh, he was pissed because he literally said to me, I'll be back. I'll be back with a search warrant, and you're going to jail. He then evidently went to the landlord at the hotel. He tells me the landlord there said that he had tried to get him to press charges against me for something, which he wouldn't do. I hadn't done anything wrong. But that's when I figured I needed to get the hell out of Dodge. So I literally went and lived with someone under their name for a while so I could get off the grid, make myself harder to find. I continued to have Social Security told me that a police officer had contacted them saying I was impersonating myself. My bank said a police officer contacted them saying I was impersonating myself. I mean, this kind of thing went on for months of this kind of, it made it where I couldn't even access my bank accounts. I almost lost my disability. I almost lost I could have been homeless if I wasn't living with this person, thank God. When I moved out, he told me the police approached him and pressured him into filing a police report for theft against me. He did government contract work. He claims that they had said that if he didn't sign this complaint against me, he'd never get another government contract. So, I mean, again, I don't end it. If she killed herself, where is this coming from? Where is whoever this problem was following me? This kind of harassment went on and on after her death for a few months. I mean, like I said, I'd get a call from my bank saying a police officer called saying I was impersonating myself and could I come down and show my identification and clear this up? And I'm like, what complaint? What police officer? I mean, I'm trying to think, where is this coming from? And I had jobs come through, same thing. They said, police officer contacted us asking questions. I mean, it was really, somebody was obviously following me, surveilling me, and causing me problems, and I couldn't identify why. And then it just stopped. I remember it just stopped. And I, of course, wondered why. You know, I'm kind of curious, like, why would I be under this kind of campaign or whatever in connection with Jeannie's death, and then all of a sudden it stopped, which is another thing I remember. After her death, I contacted a lot of different press saying that I had the emails, I had the text messages, I wanted to talk about no one would talk to me. No one would put me on the air, didn't want to hear it. And it wasn't like I was some crackpot. I mean, I'm running the hotline for Sex Workers Anonymous. It's logical to assume that I've talked to this woman. I've got proof I've talked to this woman. Montgomery's vouching that we know each other and we're friends. So he's vouched to the press that we were friends. So why would they not want to talk to me? But it stopped. And I remember I went online wondering what could possibly be the connection of why it seemed like they just left me alone. That's when I found that Montgomery had published the book, Why Just Her, I think it was, where basically he had, in my opinion, copped out and said it was suicide. I was angry. I was very angry. Because in my opinion, this woman was murdered for what she knew and what she was standing up for and what she was trying to accomplish. And see, that's another thing. Right after I heard the news, I should add this, right after I heard the news, of course I called her mother. And I said, how are you holding up? Are you okay? Is there anything I can do? At that time, her mother told me that she felt it was murder. And you've got to realize I was recording these calls, so I've got her mother saying that she thought it was murder. And I told her mom, well, tell the press that you think it's murder. Say something. She told me flat out that she was scared that if she said it was murder, that whoever murdered her was going to come. And you know, I got it. She's an elderly, sick woman. She's in like a mobile home park in Florida. She's living by herself. She doesn't have a gun in the house. Her daughter's just been murdered. I can totally get that she is worried that they're going to come back and finish the job. And that's when she asked me, she said, will you please not make a huge fuss about this because they might come back and get me. So she did start telling the press. She thought it was suicide, but that's because she was scared. She was scared they were going to come back against her. So I never, while she was alive, I never said she was lying because I understood that she was scared and trying to protect herself. But I did want to try to get the truth out, which I guess wasn't ever going to happen because nobody wanted to talk to me. They knew me. I called them. They had my number. They were aware that I had the text messages, the emails, the phone calls recorded, etc. They were aware, and no one wanted to talk to me, supposedly. But, of course, before the autopsy was done, before the toxicology reports were in, I hear suicide. I mean, they'd made up their mind. Her body wasn't even cold when they said it was suicide. But I'd asked Montgomery why he would say it was suicide. He said, I've got to move on with my life. I have a family. He said, I have to move on with my life. And evidently he told me that he'd been under the same kind of heat that I've been under. And again, I can't fault someone with a family. I get it. I was having the same problems. So I understood. I wasn't happy about it, but I understood. And I was okay. I was really okay with it. I understood where it was coming from until I started seeing the lies, the outright lies that he started telling, like on Alex Jones, about names that were in their book, things that happened. That's when I got angry. I feel like somebody got to him. Somebody was bribing him because it was not the truth. So when the election came around and he started giving interviews, and interesting, they would talk to him when I was the one that was talking to her the day of her death, for God's sake. But he hadn't talked to her in ages, I know of, before the death. Anyway, but hey, he was evidently saying what the press wanted to hear. So I guess that's why he's the one that's out there in the press. And I mean, I just got word of this so-called documentary. I remember getting a call from CNN's producers about 2016. And they were talking about, wanting to do the interview with me for the documentary. I don't know what happened. I never got followed up when they did this thing with Hill Harper. I find it interesting that they got a slew of people that didn't know her, but not anybody that did. So I feel the woman was murdered because she was trying to get the truth out about some things that are going on in this country. And to see that she's still being covered up bothers me a lot. Because you know what? If it was suicide, if it was, then why won't the press talk to me? Why? Why is there like this big wall of silence and they'll talk to strangers, but they won't talk to me? I was the closest one with her. I would think that they'd want to see these communications if they're interested in the truth, which I don't think they are. So how can it be suicide if the press isn't willing to look at the truth? But we all know about the press anymore. And anyway, that's why I'm making this tape and trying to, for those that are interested, obviously, if you're going through something like this and you feel like nobody understands, we do understand at Sex Workers Anonymous. We do have people that have been through all kinds of things, obviously, that can provide you with a lot of support and guidance through your own journeys out of this business. And, we had tried, like I said, to help her sort of, move on. She chose this path. So that's why I said I feel like she died trying to get the truth out. And I really feel like it deserves to be heard. That's what bothers me, is her voice needs to be heard, and it's being covered up, which is why I'm making the tape and going to start working on, maybe I'll start working on my own documentary about her. Anyway, if anybody wants to talk to me, they can reach me at sexworkersanonymous.net.